Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, we are going to talk a little bit about abortion, probably the most controversial topic that we can think to discuss, and we're going to just dive right into it. This is one of those topics that it is impossible for people in this country to see eye to eye on, and there are a number of reasons why that is, and that's why it's one of the most hotly contested and discussed topics that there can possibly be, because the pro-choice people and the pro-life people have such a fundamental disagreement about the topic that they're not even speaking the same language often when they discuss this. If you're pro-life, for example, and you believe that life begins at conception, which a gigantic percentage of people actually believe that life begins at conception, that means that every voluntary abortion, I'm not talking about miscarriages, I'm not talking about accidents, I'm talking about the choice that people make to have an abortion. Every time that they have an abortion, somebody views that as an actual taking of a human life. And if you believe that, then you look at abortion as one of the greatest evils of all time. Whereas if you are on the pro-choice side and you do not believe that life begins at conception, you view any infringement on the right to choose as an assault against women. And so we're having two different discussions, one about women's rights, one about the right to life. And these things are a Venn diagram that doesn't overlap, right? They are two circles. Here's a circle, here's a circle. They don't touch each other, and they don't have anything to do with one another, and that's why we can't ever agree on this topic, why we'll never get to a place of understanding as long as we're having two different conversations. So we're going to discuss a little bit about the history, a little bit about what's going on right now, and then at the end probably give some personal thoughts. So let's just dive right in. Everyone knows the phrase, not everyone I suppose, but most people know the phrase Roe versus Wade and the fact that that's the law that legalized abortion. Most people don't understand it, so we're going to talk about it. Well, Roe v. Wade was a case that went to the Supreme Court in 1973 when it was decided. Before the ruling, before Roe v. Wade was settled at the Supreme Court, there were hardly any abortion clinics in the country because abortion was criminalized in most U.S. states. Now, Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision on the Supreme Court, 7-4 for establishing the law, 2 against it. And the decision impacted laws in 46 states. And what this law did, was it legalized abortion throughout the entirety of pregnancy. But it stipulated that the states were allowed to decide whether abortions could be provided during the second and third trimesters. So all this basically did was say abortion's legal in the first trimester everywhere. In the second and third trimester, we're going to leave it up to the states to make their own laws. That was what Roe v. Wade did. It legalized abortion everywhere. That is true. But it kicked back second and third trimester abortions to the state. Now, while this affected most of the states, 46 states had laws criminalizing some portion of abortion at the time of this decision. It affected most states, and looking back right now, it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. The justification that they use for this decision is highly regarded as a terrible legal decision. And we'll get into that right now. The justification, there was two main arguments made by the justices in the Roe v. Wade decision, the 14th Amendment and the right to privacy. Now, the 14th Amendment was a post-Civil War amendment, the 13th, 14th, and 15th. Let's see, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th was about natural rights, and the 15th was the Anti-Discrimination Amendment. I believe those are the big three. But the 14th is one we're going to talk about right now. The 14th Amendment, I pulled up the phrase here just so I could actually read the part that's important. This is the line that they use to justify abortion. A law, by the way, an amendment to the Constitution that was made to protect the natural rights of citizens and make sure that the black populace in the United States were treated as citizens of the United States. That is the same law used to justify abortion. Wrap your head around that. But here's the line that they pulled to justify it in the Constitution and to try and make abortion a constitutionally protected amendment or law. Okay, here's the line from the 14th Amendment. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. That's it. That's the line. So the argument was made that you were actually denying liberty to people who could not get abortions, and that you were denying equal protection under the law because there's no law criminalizing male abortions. So it's actually an infringement on women. This is the line rationale used in Roe. And the other one is this right to privacy. Now, the right to privacy is just completely made up. It is actually not found anywhere in the Constitution. It's nowhere in the text. What they said was it's implied through a number of different places in the Constitution that there is a right to privacy and that abortion falls under that right. So even if the right to privacy existed, I don't know how abortion would fall under this category, but it doesn't exist in the first place. So the rationale, the justification for why Roe versus Wade was settled, was the law of the land, is a bad legal decision. Again, this is not saying being pro-choice is bad, being pro-life is great. That's not what that's saying. Everyone who's anyone with knows anything about law, who has any sort of understanding of how the Supreme Court works, understands that Roe versus Wade is a bad legal decision, which is why it's always been contested so hotly, because people look at it as a bad legal decision and one that could be overturned if given the right justices on the court. The left has argued that stare decisis should reign supreme, and that Roe versus Wade is the law of the land. It's settled law, quote unquote settled law. I've always found this argument to be nonsensical. Stare decisis is basically just a fancy phrase for respect for precedent. So it's saying that the court made a decision, you should respect that decision. However, that is just complete bunk because, for example, Roe versus Wade was 1973. So you're saying about 50 years have gone by since then? Is that right? 80, 90, yeah, about 50 years. About 50 years have gone by, and it's been settled law. Well, okay. Plessy versus Ferguson was decided in 1896, and Plessy versus Ferguson was the doctrine that gave us separate but equal. It was one of the worst decisions in Supreme Court history. It gave us separate but equal. It basically stated that as long as black people had the same kind of facility, then you could make laws that said that they could have their own thing and whites could have their own thing and keep it separate but equal. Now, it was a completely terrible decision that is racist and awful and evil, but it didn't get overturned until Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. It actually stood for longer than Roe versus Wade has stood. So for any argument, anyone who uses that fancy phrase stare decisis, ask them that question. Should we have respected precedent for Plessy versus Ferguson? Because it was Supreme Court precedent for, what did we just say, 58 years. That's 8 years longer than Roe. So that argument doesn't make any sense. If something is wrong, then the Supreme Court's job is to look at their past decisions and overturn them. The Dred Scott decision. Should we have respected that precedent? I don't think so. Seems like a terrible idea. So that to me is not a good argument. So the legal arguments, the 14th Amendment, the right to privacy, stare decisis, any of this stuff that people are saying that we should take into consideration about Roe versus Wade, those arguments don't make much sense to me. There are some that do, but those ones do not. The reason why we're talking about this today, I'm sure everyone's aware, is because for the first time in Supreme Court history, a draft decision has been leaked to the media, and this is incredibly troubling. This should trouble everyone, left, right, center, doesn't matter who you are. This is something that you should not be okay with. If you think that it's appropriate that for the first time in our history, a Supreme Court draft has been leaked, and you think it's a good thing, you're wrong. There's no argument. You're just wrong. This is undermining the legitimacy of the court. And now we have two options. One, the draft can go ahead The draft can go ahead and be law and be signed into law, or the judges are going to change their mind. And if they do that, then the court has actively been influenced by the public in a way that it's not supposed to be. The court is supposed to not be swayed by public opinion. They're supposed to go off the law and what they believe is the best legal rationale that they can come up with for what they're doing. And right now, this is terrible that we have people outside judges' homes. First of all, if you protest outside of a judge's home, there's actually federal laws against this. To influence a decision that they're making, that's a crime. We should be locking these people up in jail. I am not for locking up peaceful protesters, but this is not, there's actually laws against this for a reason. You should not be able to influence the judiciary, period. Legislators, fine. If you want to protest outside your congressman's office and you want to have a sit-in, you want to do whatever, I don't care. That's fine because they're legislators. They're accountable to the people. The judges are not. That is a different thing. Our legal system should not be swayed by public opinion, period. It should be done off the letter of the law. And so if you protest outside of a judge's house, you should go to jail because that is a crime for a reason. And this is coming from me. And everyone knows that my number one topic is free speech. I believe in the fundamental right for free speech at all times. I am a free speech absolutist. But there is one area of life when we cannot allow speech to influence our judicial system. That's the entire basis of our country, is the objectiveness of our legal system. We don't get to just have mob rule in this country when it comes to enforcing laws. That is not good. You're not allowed to intimidate or threaten people. You can't slander or commit libel, and you're not allowed to intimidate judges. That's basically the entire catch-all of all the things that I don't think you're allowed to do. And they're doing it right now, and it's wrong, and that is terrible. The draft decision itself, it was written by Justice Alito, and it basically eviscerates the Roe decision in its entirety. It says all the things I just said, how terrible of a legal decision it is. Some of the arguments I've heard people make say things like, well, if they overturn this, they're going to come for gay marriage. They're going to come for contraceptives. They're going to do this and that. That argument also, to me, doesn't hold much weight because in the draft decision itself, Alito writes, this is a special decision because it affects two people, which is the mother and the fetus, and we have to take that into account. He explicitly says they're not going to go after Obergefell versus Hodge, which is the gay marriage decision, or the right to contraceptive, which is Casey. Ooh, I can't remember the name of that one. But he says specifically in the decision, they're not coming after gay marriage. They're not coming after this. Abortion is its own special thing, and we have to watch out what happens for that because of the special circumstances regarding it. And you know what? I think that that's a fine thing to say because abortion is different than gay marriage or contraceptive or whatever the case may be. So in the event that the justices do what it looks like they're going to do, which is overturn Roe, then what happens? If the justices 5-4 overturn Roe, what happens? What is going to happen? I think a lot of people misunderstand this. You're looking at polling, and you'll see polling that says 70% of the country says that they shouldn't overturn Roe. That's misleading because when you actually explain Roe to people, that number drops to about 50-50. Because what Roe does is it basically makes abortion legal throughout the first trimester in all the states and then allows states leeway in the second and third trimesters as to what to do. What will happen if Roe is overturned is that first trimester protection goes back to the states as well, which means that it does not make abortion illegal. The federal government does not have a law criminalizing abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned. All it does is kick it back to the states. So right now, I believe it's 13 states have trigger laws in effect. So the day that Roe versus Wade is overturned, 13 states have trigger laws that make abortion illegal in, I believe, most cases, all cases. And that number will probably wind up being somewhere like 24 to 26, it looks like. So 24 states are probably going to make abortion illegal in most cases, and 26 states will not. Now, if you look at a place like Florida, Florida just had a 16-week bill. We're going to get into my personal views here. Most people who know or watch the channel or know me personally know that I used to be as progressive as you could get, as far on the left as you could possibly imagine, and I had some things happen dealing with the progressives that I just couldn't handle. And most of it, a lot of it had to do with Middle Eastern politics at first, and Israel, which I thought that they were totally backwards on. And then it branched out into other things as well. When the left went crazy with the race and gender stuff, they lost me. But abortion is one of those things that I've always held up to keep my lefty cred and say, look, this is something that I've never changed my view on. And it's true. I still am. I actually have adopted the Dave Rubin phrase, begrudgingly pro-choice. I do think that there is a line to be drawn. I will freely acknowledge that the most logically consistent position you can hold is that life begins at conception. At least it's I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying it's the thing that you use to define life is arbitrary. You're just picking it out. So if you use viability outside the womb, for example, which is a common one, well, every year we get better and better and better at protecting life outside the womb. So that goes down. It used to be 25 weeks. Then it was 24, 23, 22, 20. It's going to keep going down and down and down. So does that mean that all the abortions that are done today, where we can't keep a fetus alive outside the womb, so we're doing an abortion at 19 weeks. Well, what about next year if we figure out a way that, we can actually make 19-week-old babies who are born healthy? Does that mean that abortion then today doesn't count because we couldn't do it today? That it wasn't a life then, but it's a life next year? That doesn't make any sense. If the line moves, it's not a good line. So you can point to some biblical references that say things like life doesn't begin till the blood flows, which is something like 8 days into the pregnancy. You can draw when you don't think abortion should be legal after the fetus can feel pain. Again, these are arbitrary definitions that we just pick up. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying you have to acknowledge that they are a little arbitrary. You're just picking a way to choose what life is and what life isn't, whereas at least at conception, which I don't believe, by the way, at conception is logically consistent. So this is always something I've maintained as one of the things I can point to that I didn't really ever change my mind on. So when I look at Florida, they just had a 16-week ban on abortion. To me, something like that is where most of the country is. Most of the country is not radical. New York just made, the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, just said that abortion should be legal up to point of birth. That is an insane position. If you think that your due date is tomorrow and you should be able to go in the day before and have an abortion, I'm sorry, you're wrong. That's terrible. That is a baby at that point. And I don't think anyone with any semblance of decency can say otherwise. That's just me. You don't get to have a point of birth abortion and be a good person. Let's just dispel this right now. I know exactly what people are going to say. So when you're arguing against people who are pro-choice, they will often use fringe cases to argue their point. Rape, incest, life of the mother, life of the fetus. So the fetus is not viable. The life of the mother is in danger. The pregnancy resulted from rape and incest. Just say, okay, yes. Let's just grant you all those premises. You can have an abortion in cases of rape, incest, cases of the mother's health, cases of fetal health. Okay, then let's talk about the 99% that actually are not that. The overwhelming majority of abortions are done just purely from choice. So if somebody has one of those cases and say, what about someone who's raped? What about someone who has an incestuous relationship and it results in pregnancy? You just say, okay, fine. Then what about all the other cases? Because if you are actually arguing that those should be legal, okay, fine. What about all the other cases? Most people would acknowledge that at some point during a pregnancy, that goes from being a fetus to a baby. It goes from being a cluster of cells to potential for human life. 16 weeks to me does not seem like an unreasonable amount of time. Again, I believe that polling data shows most people in the country are somewhere around there. Third trimester abortions are incredibly unpopular. And there is data that backs that up. And so you say, okay, what should the ban be? Where should we draw the line? That's a question that's up for debate. For me, I don't have any problem with 16 weeks. I really don't. I think that Florida law is pretty solid because before that, you can make a good case that it's fine, or at least I can justify it. But the thing that changed me on this, because I used to be more radical on the abortion thing. I used to just say no restrictions. But the thing that changed me on this was I was involved in a call that had a 20-week-old baby that was born, and I remember watching, and it wasn't at that. It was basically just at the cusp of viability. But I remember watching that thing be born and try and breathe and cry and live. And it really messed me up. And I said, okay, you know what? That kind of changed my mind as to where the life, because that thing was clearly a baby at that time. And I said, in my mind, I couldn't justify and said, if that was still in this person's stomach, they could go in there and cut it up and suck it out with a vacuum. And we just say that that's fine. I couldn't justify it in my head after that point. So to me, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know the thing. That's kind of where I am on it. I think I would support that Florida law in most places and say if by 16 weeks you don't figure it out, I don't know what to tell you. That's at that point, it's not about you. It really isn't. And if people look at that as an assault on women, I'm sorry. There are a number of consequences that lead to the point of being pregnant. And again, let's take rape and incest off the table. So let's take that less than 0.5% of cases off the table and talk about the 99%. That's what we're talking about when I say there are choices that people make. And it happens. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think anyone can guarantee you that they have the perfect right answer. But that's where we sit right now. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it's not going to be the end of the world. There's a lot of people I know, had a lot of friends text me and ask me if what it's going to change. All it means is it's going to kick it back to the states. Some states are going to be strict. Some states are not. And if you're a woman who wants to get an abortion, there are still going to be options for you. People talk about poor women not being able to have access. We don't live in 1950. This is 2022. The idea that a poor woman in Mississippi is not going to be able to get an abortion, I don't believe it. Because I guarantee you that there are already funds that are being set up to help women in need if they choose to get an abortion. I promise you there's going to be so much money on the table for people for travel expenses, for the procedure expenses, to get them to the clinics that they need to get to. I live in Missouri. There's probably going to be laws in Missouri. All you got to do is take a ride across the river to Illinois. There are options. It's not going to be the end of the world. Overturning Roe does not criminalize abortion. It just goes back to the state. If you don't like the state you're in, you can move. You're not tied to Mississippi. You don't have to live there. That's the beauty about having a confederation of states. We are a collection of states that all have their own laws and norms, and you can choose where to live. It's great. That's part of the freedom of being an American. I don't want people to freak out about this. It'll be okay. All right. This is a giant deal for everyone involved. The pro-life people are happy. The pro-choice people are incredibly angry. But it's not going to be the end of anyone's life. It really won't. This is not going to kill anyone. Okay. There are going to be options on the table for women and it just won't be as convenient. It's just not going to be as easy. And if you don't like that, then move to California, move to New York. It's not. I know people say it's not that easy to just up and leave. I get it, but if this is the most important thing in your life, you need to make sure you have access to all the abortions of your choice. Then go to California. They're not going to criminalize it there. It's up to the states. Anyway, we're going to leave it there. I am sure there's going to be questions, comments, and stuff about this. I'm sure there's a lot of things that I missed, points I need to clarify, things that I did not go over. But just let me know in the comments on either YouTube or Facebook, whatever you want, and I will respond in kind either on those platforms or in the next video. Until then, you guys take care. I'm Tyler Chrestman. I'll talk to you later.